I stared at the screen of my phone, my thumb hovering over the block button. The message from my mother was still glowing against the dark background, a single sentence that felt like a physical blow to my chest. "Stop being so dramatic, Elena. It was just a burial, a trivial event. Move on so we can finally have a normal dinner." I didn't cry. I think I had run out of tears 3 days ago when I watched the dirt hit the top of Mark's casket. I was standing in the middle of my living room, surrounded by boxes of his things, his sweaters, his books, the half-finished crossword puzzles he'd leave on the coffee table. The silence in the house was deafening, but it wasn't as loud as the ringing in my ears caused by my parents' coldness. In that moment, something inside me clicked. It was a cold, sharp sound, like a key turning in a lock that had been jammed for years. I didn't reply. I didn't scream. I simply pressed my thumb against the screen, selected the options, and made a choice that would change my life forever. I cut the cord. I stopped calling them family. But the path to that moment, the trail of broken promises, manipulated holidays, and silent warfare, started long before the earth covered my husband. You think you know your parents, but wait until you see what they're capable of when they stop pretending to love you. The house feels like a museum now, a shrine to a life that ended before it even really began. Mark was 34. He had a laugh that could fill a room, a way of looking at me that made me feel like the only person on earth. Now the space where he stood is just empty air. But the emptiness isn't the hardest part. It's the invasion. My parents have been calling me non-stop since the funeral, not to ask if I'm eating or if I'm sleeping or if I need help sorting through the mountain of bills that arrived after the accident. No, they are calling to talk about the inheritance logistics. They are calling to suggest that I rethink the house, that I liquidate his assets so I can get back to being a daughter. Their voices on the other end of the line are smooth, practiced, and utterly hollow. They don't see a widow grieving her soulmate. They see someone who is standing in the way of a plan they probably drafted while I was still in the hospital, waiting for the news that Mark didn't make it. The tension is thick enough to choke on. Every time the phone rings, my heart spikes, not with hope, but with a primal defensive fear. I am surrounded by memories of love, while they are trying to dismantle my foundation for their own comfort. The betrayal isn't just that they don't care, it's that they are actively trying to make me feel small, ungrateful, and crazy for mourning the man I loved. Growing up, my parents were the kind of people who cared more about the view from the window than the life inside the house. Everything was about appearance. We lived in a beautiful home in the suburbs, the kind with perfectly manicured lawns and neighbors who never talked above a whisper. My father was a high-powered consultant, and my mother was the queen of the social circuit. I remember my 8th birthday party. I had asked for a simple sleepover, maybe some pizza and a movie. My mother had other plans. She turned it into a formal dinner party with her colleagues. I was forced to wear a stiff, itchy dress and sit quietly while adults discussed interest rates and property taxes. When I asked if I could go play with my friends in the backyard, she gripped my shoulder, her fingernails digging into my skin, and whispered, "Don't be embarrassing, Elena. Smile." That was the theme of my childhood. Smile. Don't be embarrassing. Then I met Mark. He was the opposite of everything I knew. He worked as a landscape architect, a job that involved dirt, sweat, and genuine creativity. He didn't care about status. When he first came to my parents' house, he wore a button-down that was slightly wrinkled and brought a bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked from the side of the road. My mother's face when she saw those weeds was something I'll never forget. It was a mix of confusion and pure, unadulterated disdain. How rustic, she had said, her voice dripping with ice. But Mark didn't care. He held my hand under the table during dinner, his palm warm and calloused, a sharp contrast to the cold, sterile environment I'd been raised in. He made me feel seen. For the first time, I wasn't an ornament. I was a person. When he asked me to marry him, he didn't do it at a gala or with a massive diamond to impress my father. He did it on a hike in the mountains, with the wind whipping our hair around and the smell of pine filling the air. He whispered it in my ear, his voice ragged with emotion. I knew then that I had found my safe place. I just didn't realize that my safe place would eventually become the target for the people who were supposed to love me most. The cracks started appearing slowly, like a spider web forming on a windshield. It wasn't one big explosion, it was 1,000 little cuts. It started with the wedding planning. My parents didn't want a wedding, they wanted a show. They fought us on every detail, from the venue to the guest list. You can't invite Mark's college friends, my father would argue, his brow furrowed in frustration. They're not the type of people we associate with. They're his best friends, Dad, I'd counter, feeling my pulse quicken. They've been there for him through everything. They're a liability, my mother would chime in, sipping her wine. We have a reputation to maintain. It felt like they were trying to rewrite Mark's history to fit their narrative. They subtly undermined him at every turn. They'd make jokes about his income or his lack of a prestigious career path. They'd ask me in front of him if I was sure I didn't want to reconsider my options. You have such potential, Alina, my mother would say, looking at me with what she pretended was concern. It would be a shame to waste it on a hobbyist. Mark took it with a grace that honestly made me feel ashamed. He'd just smile and squeeze my hand, whispering, "They don't know me yet, Elle. Give it time." But it wasn't about time, it was about control. They hated that I was happy with someone they couldn't influence. They hated that Mark didn't need their approval to validate his existence. I remember one specific Thanksgiving, about a year after we married. My father pulled me into his study, the smell of expensive leather and old paper suffocating me. He told me that he'd been looking into Mark's financial investments, just for our protection. "He's risky, Elena," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "If anything happens to him, you'll be left with nothing. I've drafted a post-nuptial agreement, just a safety net, really." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and realized he wasn't trying to protect me. He was trying to wedge a door open between me and my husband. I walked out of that study and never looked back, but the seed of doubt had been planted in their minds. They didn't see a marriage, they saw a risk to their legacy, and they were already planning how to mitigate that risk, even if it meant destroying us in the process. The escalation happened fast after we refused to sign that agreement. My parents stopped acting like the concerned high society types and started acting like enemies. They stopped inviting us to family events, but they made sure to post photos of themselves at dinners and weekend trips on social media, tagged with comments about family togetherness. It was a classic move, public shaming masked as inclusivity. But it got worse. Mark started getting calls from anonymous sources, or at least we assumed they were anonymous. He was told that his latest project was being audited, or that there were questions about his permits. It was sabotage, pure, simple, and cowardly. He'd come home looking exhausted, his shoulders slumped, trying to shield me from the stress. "It's nothing, honey," he'd say, rubbing his temples. "Just bureaucratic nonsense. I'll get it sorted." But I knew. I had seen my father's work before. He was a master at using systems to crush opposition. I confronted my mother one day, catching her in a rare moment of vulnerability at a charity luncheon. I backed her into a corner near the catering table. "Why are you doing this?" I hissed, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "He's a good man. He's my husband."
She looked at me, her face a perfect mask of cold indifference. She didn't blink. "We are protecting your future, Elena. You're too naive to see it. He's dragging you down. When he's gone, and he will be, given the stress he's under, you'll thank us for making sure you have a soft landing." My heart stopped. Did she just imply? "What do you mean when he's gone?" I asked, my blood running cold. She just smiled, a thin, tight line. "We all have our time, don't we? It's only sensible to be prepared." I left that building shaking. I went straight to Mark and told him everything. We decided then and there that we were done. We cut off contact completely. We changed our numbers, our passwords, our routines. We moved to a quieter part of town, closer to the woods where the air felt cleaner and the past felt further away. We were happy. We were finally truly happy. And then, 3 months later, the call came. The police, the hospital, the shattered glass. The world turned black. And in that darkness, I didn't reach out to my parents. I knew better. I knew exactly who they were.
After the funeral, that cold, detached, trivial event where my mother wore a dress that looked like it belonged at a cocktail party and my father checked his watch every 5 minutes, I was left to handle the estate. It was a nightmare of paperwork. Mark had been meticulous about his affairs, but my parents, through their influence, had managed to freeze some of his accounts, claiming there was a legal dispute regarding some of his business ventures. I was sitting in my living room, surrounded by files, when I found it. It was tucked inside a hollowed-out book, a book on landscape design he'd kept on his nightstand. It wasn't a bank statement or a deed. It was a digital recorder. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely press play. The first voice was my father's. It was the same voice he used to give business advice, steady and calculating. "The permit issues will be enough to cause him stress," he said. "He's a prideful man. He won't ask for help, and when the project fails, he'll be vulnerable." Then, a second voice, a man I didn't recognize. "And if he doesn't fail on his own?" "Then we apply pressure," my father replied. "He has a routine. He takes the back road home. It's dark, it's isolated." I dropped the recorder. The sound of it hitting the floor was like a gunshot in the quiet room. I sat there, paralyzed. They hadn't just been sabotaging his work. They were tracking him. They were orchestrating his downfall. And the implication hung in the air. They might have been responsible for the accident itself. I needed help. I couldn't go to the police yet. I didn't have enough. I needed a shark. I reached out to an old friend from college, Sarah, who had become one of the top litigators in the city. She wasn't just a lawyer, she was a fixer. When she arrived, she didn't offer pity. She offered a plan. "If they did this," she said, looking over the contents of the recorder, "they left a trail. You just need to know where to look. They think you're a grieving widow who is too weak to fight back. Let them keep thinking that." Sarah and I spent the next 4 days in a state of controlled mania. We had a deadline. My parents had filed a petition for conservatorship over me, citing my mental instability following Mark's death. They were trying to gain control of his entire estate, claiming they were the only ones capable of managing it properly. The hearing was in 3 days. "They're moving fast," Sarah warned. "They want to get this done before you have time to grieve or think. They want to bury the truth under a mountain of legal jargon." I didn't sleep. Every night I'd listen to that recording, trying to identify the second voice. I'd search through Mark's digital files, his emails, his GPS logs. I was a woman possessed. I felt the weight of every hour ticking by, a countdown to the moment they expected me to show up in court, broken and defeated. I had to look the part. I had to go to meetings, discuss settlements, and act as if I were the fragile, grieving girl they wanted me to be. It was the hardest acting job of my life. I wore black, I kept my head down, and I let them talk. "You're doing the right thing, Elena," my mother said during one of our meetings, her hand resting on mine. Her touch felt like acid.
Just sign the papers. We'll take care of everything. You don't need the stress of the estate." "I just want it to be over," I whispered, keeping my eyes down. "It will be," she promised, a predatory smile touching her lips. "It will be very soon." The walls were closing in. I could feel the trap snapping shut, but I was the one holding the hammer. Every time I looked at them, I had to remind myself, not yet. Hold it together. Wait for the moment. The tension was so thick I could taste it, a metallic tang of adrenaline and survival. I was living a double life, the victim in the public eye and the investigator in the shadows, and the clock kept ticking.
The day of the hearing arrived, but it wasn't held in a courtroom. My parents, thinking they had already won, had arranged a private mediation at their home to finalize the transition. They invited a few of their high-profile friends, the kind of people whose opinions they valued more than their own daughter's life. I arrived with Sarah. My parents looked shocked, then annoyed. "Who is this?" my father asked, looking at Sarah like she was an unwanted insect. "My legal counsel," I said. My voice was steady. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't shaking. We walked into the living room. It was filled with people, their faces wearing masks of forced sympathy. My parents were playing the role of the devoted, grieving parents, offering me drinks and guiding me to a seat. "Let's just get the signatures," my father said, waving a hand toward the table covered in documents. "We want you to start healing, darling." "I'm not signing anything, Dad." My voice cut through the room like a blade. The room went silent. My mother's smile vanished. "Elena, don't be ridiculous. You're upset. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said, standing up. I pulled a small device from my bag, the recorder. "I know about the project sabotage. I know about the back road, and I know about the man you hired to make sure Mark didn't interfere with your plans." My father's face went white. "You're delusional." "Am I?" I pressed play. The sound of his voice filled the room. The silence that followed was absolute. People started looking at each other, murmuring. My mother stood up, her face twisted in rage. "You little brat, you think this proves anything? You're a grieving, unstable widow. Who are they going to believe, us or you?" "They're going to believe the police," Sarah said, stepping forward, "because we've already handed them the original recording, along with the records of your bank transfers to the man on that tape." The room exploded. My parents' friends started backing away, their faces full of shock and disgust. The veneer was gone. The perfect family was shattered. My father tried to grab the device, but Sarah blocked him with the ease of someone who had practiced this move in a dozen courtrooms. "You're finished," Sarah said, her voice cool and professional. "The police are outside. They have a warrant for your arrest, not just for the fraud, but for conspiracy." The color drained from my mother's face. She looked around the room, desperate for an ally, but everyone was either looking at their phones or staring at the floor. The power shift was absolute. The people they had spent their lives trying to impress were now the witnesses to their downfall. "You're ruining your family," my father shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You did that a long time ago." The police officers entered the room, their presence a stark contrast to the opulence of the surroundings. They moved with purpose. My parents were escorted out, not with the dignity they expected, but with the cold efficiency of a standard arrest. They weren't powerful figures anymore. They were just two people who had let their greed and arrogance consume them. As they walked past me, my mother looked at me. There was no apology in her eyes, just a flash of pure, unadulterated hatred. It was the moment I realized they had never loved me. They had only ever loved the version of me they could control. And when I stopped being that, I became the enemy. I didn't feel triumph, exactly. I felt a profound sense of clarity. The secret wasn't just that they had done this, it was that I was strong enough to face it. I had survived them, and that was the ultimate victory. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The news spread quickly. The perfect couple exposed as greedy, manipulative, and worse. The social fallout was brutal. They were shunned by the circles they had spent decades building.
Their assets were frozen, their reputation destroyed, and they were left facing legal battles that would likely consume the rest of their lives. But for me, the consequences were different. I was finally free. The house, the one they had tried to take, became my sanctuary. I sold it eventually. I couldn't stay there, not after everything. I moved to a different city, a place where no one knew my name or my parents' history. I started over. It wasn't easy. The grief for Mark didn't disappear, it just changed shape. It became a quiet, constant companion. But the weight of my parents' presence, that shadow that had hung over me since I was a child, was gone. I received one final message from my mother months later from a jail phone. It was a long, rambling letter about how I was an ungrateful child and how they had only ever wanted the best for me. I didn't read past the first line. I deleted it, just as I had deleted her number. I checked in with the lawyers occasionally just to ensure the legal process was moving forward. It was. They were facing significant jail time. It felt final. It felt right. The world didn't end because I walked away. In fact, it was the beginning of the only world that had truly belonged to me.
I sit here now, in a small apartment by the ocean, listening to the waves. It's been a year. I've learned how to cook, how to manage my own finances, and how to find beauty in the quiet moments of the day. I've learned that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up for you, who respects you, and who loves you without an agenda. I still miss Mark every single day. I see his face in the light of the morning and his laughter in the sound of the wind. I keep his memory safe, not as a casualty of my parents' greed, but as the love that gave me the strength to save myself. I'm not the same person I was. That girl who wanted to please everyone, who was afraid of being embarrassing, is gone. She was forged in the fire of betrayal and came out as someone who knows her worth. I don't look back with regret. I don't look back with anger anymore either. I look back with a strange, quiet gratitude. If they hadn't pushed me, if they hadn't made that trivial comment about his death, I might still be trapped in that gilded cage, pretending that everything was fine. But I'm not fine. I'm better than fine. I'm free. And for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am. Looking back, the hardest part wasn't the legal battle or the public scandal. It was the realization that the people I called family were the ones I had to protect myself from the most. It's a painful lesson, but it's one that taught me the most important thing of all. You are the author of your own story, and you have the power to decide who gets a seat at your table. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you were supposed to love? Someone who made you feel like you were the one in the wrong for setting boundaries? I want to hear your story. Sometimes just putting it into words is the first step toward healing. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if this story helped you feel a little less alone, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the face of the impossible. Remember, your voice matters, and your truth is worth protecting. Thanks for being part of this journey.